So basically the principle of trolling, I'm sure you all know, but I'm going to assume no one knows anything, is when you put the lures behind the boat at a certain distance and allow the actual momentum of the boat to pull the lures along. That's what they call trolling. As distinct from casting, where you throw it out, you let the lure land and then you retrieve the lure with various techniques. Two types of outfits that we use for barramundi fishing, be it trolling or casting. The one on the right is the one that everyone sort of knows, the traditional bait casting outfit. And of course, in recent times, last few years, thread lines have come into vogue. You know, for many years, if you've used a threadline reel barra fishing, people thought you didn't know what you were doing, but nowadays a lot of people are doing it. That's because of the advent of soft plastics as well, lighter lures, because these things will cast lighter lures, but they also have more line capacity. And I've actually found with this fast trolling, which I'll detail for you shortly, that extra line capacity can be very, very useful. So a lot of people are using thread lines. Generally, if I've got two outfits with me, one's a threadline outfit and one is a bait casting outfit. Okay, just a quick shot of a rod holder trolling situation. Normally you wouldn't leave your rod in the rod holder when you're trolling because you know, it's good to be able to feel it, to know if you've got anything on your lure, a bit of weed or something will stop the action of the lure, and with the sensitive rods we use nowadays, it's much better to hold it. Basically the gear you'll need starting from the lure itself, and we'll go through a lot of different lures shortly. You'll need your leader material. You'll see there that says 45 pound, about 20 kilo. That's about the least you would use for barramundi fishing. You know, and you can go up to almost double that, depending on how big the fish you're targeting are and where you're fishing. If you're fishing in really sort of rugged structure, you might go a bit heavier, but generally a leader is somewhere between a metre and a metre and a half, as long as it doesn't when you wind it in with your lure hanging for a cast, as long as the knot that attaches it doesn't go into the reel, because that can be a bit of a pain. That's about the length of the leader you need. And what it's there for is to give you protection, A, against the mouth of the fish if a fish has inhaled a lure, because I don't know if you've actually felt the inside of the jaws of a barramundi. It's a bit like sandpaper, quite coarse. They've got no teeth, but they can rub through the line. And they've also got sharp gill rakers. Sometimes it doesn't happen very often, but it can, because when they jump, they might inadvertently get a line onto their gill raker, and that leader helps you, protects you from that line cutting. Or it just might be barnacles on trees, rock bar, all sorts of reasons. Basically, if you don't have a leader when you're barramundi fishing, you're asking for trouble. Okay, so most lures that you get nowadays, or forever actually, it's getting better, but the hardware's just not good enough, particularly the treble hooks. A lot of people go out there, look, even one of the greatest barra lures you can ever invented, the classic 120, a sensational barramundi lure. It comes with VMC number 2 hooks. They call it 3 times extra strong, not too bad. But if you hook that really big fish, chances are you'll bend the hooks and you'll lose it. And you might get it, you might not. But I just don't think it's worth taking the risk, because those fish don't happen every day. And you know, 6 times extra VMCs or owner extra strong hooks, or the ones I use nowadays are decoy hooks. They're pretty expensive, but you know, they don't let go. And if you hook a good fish, and also a lot of the places you're fishing for barramundi, you might be trolling the Daly River past some snags. You hook a really good fish, and you're going to power the boat out and try and get the fish away from the snags. Now, if you haven't got really good hooks that will hang on with a tight drag, a tight break, those hooks will bend and you'll lose the fish a lot of the time. Okay. That's just tuning a lure. I don't know if you know, if you very quickly, if you've got a lure that's not swimming properly, okay, you see it cups up to one side, just run it along the side of your boat. That does happen, and you've got to tune them. All you've got to do is bend the eyelet the opposite to the direction it's coming up, and just, that's all you've got to do. Just remember that, simple. And you know, if you go too far, bend it back a bit. All right, well, that's just an example of a lure with a lot of contrast. Contrasting lures seem to be all the vogue nowadays, you know, bright, shiny colours. That's a classic 120 Bobby Dazzler in a bit of what they call a nitro finish, 3 different colours. You'll notice, just go back to that, you'll notice the red head. That is a very popular barramundi sort of colour, having a red head. Now these are your shallow divers. You know, there's all. You know, we're going to have a look at shallow divers. We're going to have a look at midwater divers and deep divers. These are your typical shallow divers. They've all got one thing in common. Can anyone tell me what that is? What that? Exactly. Can she win with something? One of the NAFA vouchers. Can you? Yeah. All right. What was your name, sweetie? Michelle. Could you put down Michelle's name? Yeah. What did she say? Bib size. Okay, so they're small bibs. And you'll see shortly they're big. Plus, they're inclined fairly, almost straight down. If you look at the bottom one, that's called a 1-. That's a classic 1-. It's called 1- because it swims less than 1 foot deep. And it's funny in fishing, isn't it, that we've been with the metric system for how many decades? Half a century probably, and yet we keep talking imperial. But anyway, 1 foot, 30 centimetres. The lure above that is a bomber, and the gold bomber version of that is still the biggest selling lure in Australia, mainly because of North Queensland. They just love that. But that's one of my favourite colours, the chartreuse colour there. You'll notice that the eyelet in the middle has not got a hook on that second lure from the bottom. The reason being that they don't come with strong enough hooks, and to put the sort of hooks you need on it is too much weight for that lure. So, well, that in my opinion, so I take off the middle hook quite regularly and put on 2 serious hooks on my bomber. Up above that is the lure I was telling you about before, but in a shallow diving version. That's the classic 120, and that's called a 3+, meaning 3 foot, a metre, that'll swim that at. The one above that is the Rapala X-Rap. That's a very famous lure, and certainly used by a lot of people up here. And that's another bomber up the top, a bigger version than the one below. That's I think that's called the 16A, and the one below is the 15A. And that one's big enough that you can put 3 hooks on that, and that's a tiger lily colour. Okay, these are midwater divers, some examples thereof. Starting from the bottom again, you've got a killer lure Terminator. That runs at about 2 metres. Then you've got a Reedy's Little Lucifer. That's possibly the best, or one of the best freshwater barra lures you can get. Between that and the Terminator is brilliant as well. Then you've got the killer lure Barra Bait. That runs to about 2.5 metres on the troll, maybe a little bit more. Great old lure, that's been around forever, but it really does catch fish when they're feeding at that depth. And then the classic 120, which is, may well be the best barra lure ever made. And that's in a 10+ version, and that means 10 feet. Okay, some deep divers. You can see that one down the bottom. I forgot the name of that one. James Gillies put it out, but it does work. Next one up from that is a Goulburn Jack, one of my favourites. That's another Reedy's lure. It's got the big heart-shaped bib, and that really does get down. It actually walks over snags because of that big bib that it's got with a short body. It's a great trolling lure because one of the problems with when you're trolling over structures such as submerged trees and where the barra live is that your lure is liable to get hooked. And that lure there will often, it'll just, because it swims like that, right, it'll come, well, you've got to realise the lure doesn't always hit a branch, head on. Usually the line is first, right? So the line hits it, and as the line brings the lure up, the lure's still swimming down there and then starts to come up to it. And because that lure swims like that, it'll often hit like that and bounce over it, and then off it goes again without snagging. Now, when it does that, there's often a barra, or hopefully, right there. That's where they live. So that's the lure I like, particularly for guys who don't know how to work lures over snags, which I'll try and explain to you afterwards. That's the second from the bottom. Yep. The one in the middle is a man's 20+. I'm not even sure you can get them anymore. They're not a bad lure. Then you've got the classic 15+, great lure. Once again, that's the Elton John colour. You can't get on the water, in Barra country without some of them. You just can't. and above that is a classic manta ray. I like that lure. You see the different shaped bib, it sort of dives quickly, even though it only goes to about 4 metres, maybe a bit more on the troll. It's quite a slender body, but that's a good one. And then you've got your Barra bait again, but with a different bib. Same body, different bib. That's a deep diver, 20 plus. All right, just an example of colours and sizes. Again, the contrast, and lure makers can be pretty inventive with their colours. This is the mouth of Clear Creek down the Daly River, and we were down there just trolling out of that. You can see that colour change there. You see where the fresh water's coming out after the wet season. It's got that tannin colour, and that's the main Daly River there, which is that darker colour. And the angler there is looking at his sounder. He's just looking to see, because right in the hot spot there, the colour change itself, to see if there's any fish, and if there are, to let the other two guys, me being one of them, to know about it, and maybe we should be working our rods and not taking photos. Now this is interesting. Now I said to you that just a moment ago that one of the techniques, well, I hinted at one of the techniques for trolling over snags is to be able to work your lure over the snag. Now there are lures that will help you do that. Right? Some of those big shovel nose lures will help you do that, because the lure will hit the snag first and then tumble over it and then start swimming again. But that's not always the best lure to be using. You might want to use another lure that's not quite as good at getting over snags as that lure. And the technique for doing that is basically, as you're trolling along, if you feel, you're holding your rod, and if you feel something, it's going to be your line first, okay, which should give you enough time to sort of avoid getting hooked up. But even if it's the lure itself comes in contact, if it's the lure that comes in contact, often the hooks haven't got there yet. The bib's hit, or it's, if you're ready for it, and it takes a bit of practice. This is in our tidal rivers more so than anywhere else. And if you're trolling, I should have mentioned this, if you're trolling against the current, this is why most barra fishing over structure takes place against the current. What you do is, you can see that angler there, right? He's a very good fisherman. His name's Peter Politis. He's won some tournaments. I just took these photos this day. We were fishing near him, and you can see he's felt something, right? He's put his rod back. He's looked back. He's put his rod back, and his line is going and lure over a snag. Now, when he went back there, sorry, I should have mentioned, right? See his thumb, his hand. He would have been letting out line, okay, and he's free spooling. And in this action here, he's pulling off, and he'll probably throw back again. There he is. He stood up, and he's thrown some line back, and he's just trying now to work it over the snag, because what happens is most lures float. So if it hits the snag, even if the hook touches, hopefully it hasn't pierced the structure, the wood, and because it floats and you're trolling against the current, if you put free spool on, the lure will hopefully float back and up. Right? Just makes sense. You've got current pushing it, and it floats like that. So before any hooks have actually penetrated, you can actually do that technique, and then like that, and you might feel the tree again, whoops, let some more out, and it might take you 3 or 4 goes at it. You're in neutral, by the way. You're not, get out of gear, don't, because the idea is to be stationary or even drifting backwards a little bit. And you can actually work your lure over the snag. Now, if you're good at that, you will catch more fish, because, as I said before, you're doing this right where the barra live. Okay, and he's looking at his sounder again. He's got it off, no problem, and he's back trolling. That's just an example of how barra can inhale even a big lure. That's one of those classics. And another reason why you need to have the leader. You can see the leader going down there on the right-hand side. Okay, that fish and that fish were both called by what's known as a jig trolling technique. That's what I call it, jig trolling, and it's very straightforward. Basically, you're trolling along, and it's another sort of technique that evolved about 8 years ago. It started. In the old days, when we trolled, we just hold the rod, okay, and we just go along, and the lure swims and does whatever. But jig trolling is is where you actually work the lure, but you do it intermittently. In other words, so you'll pull it out of gear, you know, pull your outboard out of gear, and as you do that, you go bang, bang. And what that does, it makes the lure dart forward, and then as you let back, it'll slowly rise, or if it's a suspended, it'll stay right there. And you do that 2 or 3 times, right? Bang, bang, and then wait again, bang, bang, and the boat's slowing down because you're out of gear. And then put it back into gear and let the line take up the slack again. Lure starts swimming. Almost as soon as it starts swimming again, give it maybe a couple of seconds to get a step down, out of gear again, and bang, bang. And often you'll get a strike. That technique has been so effective on barramundi that it actually changed the sort of barramundi that we were all catching, because previously you'd never catch a barramundi that had food in its stomach. I don't know what it is about. They're lazy fish, you know, they travel with the current, or they hold behind snags or whatever. But unless they're actively feeding, say at a creek mouth that's with bait pouring out, then you might catch them with food in their stomach. But you wouldn't do it. But with the jig trolling technique, suddenly we were getting barra that already had fat tummies like mine. And it showed that you were in their face with this technique and they just couldn't help themselves. They had to eat the lure, even though they'd already had a feed. There's that lure I showed you before, corroboree billabong. The bomber is a terrific lure in fresh water, particularly that chartreuse colour, to apply the jig trolling technique to. Put a lot of line out because it runs a bit shallow, and work those weed beds, and you'll be surprised how many barra you catch. Here you've got people trolling, and then it's another technique. You can have people trolling, and if you're doing it slow, particularly if you're in and out of gear with that technique I just explained, someone could be up the front having a bit of a flick. This is the Barra Nationals. I'm not sure why that guy's dressed like that. And that get pretty crowded. 61 boats competing in that. I'll be heading down on Saturday. Okay. Fast trolling for barramundi. That's what these boats were doing just here, by the way. And how do you know that? Have a look at the bow, at the water being displaced at the bow of the boats. Look at the one in front. Right, now if they were trolling on really slowly, you wouldn't see anything. You know, it'd be just a little trickle. But you can see they're actually pushing water because they're doing, you know, maybe 5 knots, 4 or 5 knots. And this technique, you know, it came about, as I said, 4 or 5 years ago. And what we found out was some of the bigger barramundi, they don't pull up on the snags as much as the smaller fish in our big tidal rivers, particularly on the daily. And they'll come up with the bigger tides and travel with the bait, and they're fish we never knew existed because they're sort of in the middle. You know, there's something I'll show you very quickly called what I call the Barra Highway, and this is what I regard as how these barra move up and down these rivers, these bigger fish. Those lures, by the way, are examples of the lures you would use. They're a little bit shallower divers. 2 of the bigger bombers there, the middle 2 are the Reedy's big ass B52s. That's the big B52, the striped one. Then the really coloured one's a 160 Classic, that chromey one, and the last 2 are both Classic 120s. That's that fish again that you saw jumping at the start. It's Tony Hare. There's a meatery we got that day as well. And there's that fish there. You can see it was a Classic 120. That was one I got in a couple of years ago in the Barra National. See the lure was that on the right, that green bomber, and you can see the reel as a thread line, and that was a nice 107. That colour there, I'm just flashing through a quick few now because I think I was only supposed to talk for 20 minutes. That Classic there is what they call the Guns N' Roses colour. You can't not have a couple of those in your tackle box. That is a deadly colour. All right, just here's an aerial of a tidal river, and I haven't got a pointer here, but the outside bends, that's where the deep water is. Here and here, because the water either way is pushing into that. All right, here's a collapsed bank. They're places that you would troll, okay? Deep water, you know, the outside banks. because they're getting eroded all the time. And when they're getting eroded, this sort of thing happens. The bank collapses. Now, when you see trees like that, you can bet your bottom dollar there's more out here that are now broken down, but there's still structure down there. They're just tips for hunting for barramundi. You know, when you've got a creek mouth's always a signal, but when there's a snag in front of it, you know, there's probably another couple around it, and you put submerged snags and a creek mouth together, and that's a really good place to go trolling for barramundi or having a cast. We're focusing mainly on trolling here, but just a couple of trollers. All right, now I showed you before the bend in the river. Can you imagine that being the bend now? Now the current, as the tide is coming down to it, right? See all that foam? That's indicative of where it's hitting into that bank. See, there's no foam out here. There's a couple of suds there, but mainly it's hitting there, and then, see here, and then it travels down along that bank. So that's what I was sort of calling the Barra Highway. You know, the bait and the fish, when they're moved by the current, there's signals on the water that you can see. And when you see debris floating around on the surface, flotsam, if you like, you'll see there's a trail of it, and that shows the current direction. Well, where that's floating, underneath the water's going the same way, and barra, being a lazy bloody fish, will often be in that same flow. And aware of that, you can if you're trolling, you can troll along the edge of that for your fast troll, or if you want to work snags along the edge slow with that jig trolling technique I explained to you, you can see, you know, this is a good place to be fishing for a barra, because the barra will either be waiting there, the barra will go there and flow on the current, or bait will go there to the barra that are waiting there. So there's a lot of reasons why you would fish that spot. And when you put your sounder over it, and the boys here later will show you how to do all that, who knows what you'll see. One good thing about this fast trolling, you can use all the river up, spread out a bit. There's a fish that was caught trolling on a rock bar. There's a nice barra caught trolling. Excellent netting technique there. He's slipping that right underneath him. Another good fish. These are all up in Arnhem Land for what it's worth. Again, that lure. I love that chartreuse colour in the bomber, particularly for fresh water. Here you can see the angler there's concentrating on his sounder as he's working along. Very quickly, here, you know, there's other signs on the water that you can look out for. Now, signs here, right? You've obviously got a couple of lumps. They might be snags there and there. Okay, now they would be just in front of those, because what's happening is you're getting an upwelling. So the water along the bottom is hitting rock, snag, something, might be a mud bank, and pushing up, and it's causing that on the surface. There, right? And there's snags. You can see that collapsed bank. See the angle there. So we're trolling through there, and you can see on the sounder here, you can see there's a GPS line, a trail, and I wish we could get in closer on that, but you can see those two sharp points. That is where, with your sounder, you can use a GPS, and if you've hooked a fish, that's where we stopped. We hooked the fish there, so we went back over that spot, pretty well close, and you can see the structure down there that's causing that upwelling. Modern sounders have got some excellent technology now, and again you'll see that later. But just these screenshots here, you can see they're all fish on a side imaging unit. They're all barramundi. They're all barra there, believe it or not, and see them all there. I hope I see them next week. And again, that's a snag, and it shows up pretty well. You can see that's straight down, and that's on the side. Now, I just sort of throw these up very quickly. This fish was caught yesterday down the Daly River. You know, I got an email, you know, today's charter from, I think, Darwin, Barra and Crab, they're called. He didn't send me a photo of anyone holding a crab, but anyway, that was a 118 barramundi caught yesterday, fast trolling on the Daly River. Beautiful, fat, healthy fish. That was over Easter. That's a 123. I don't know if anyone read the paper last week, but that's Warren Pope, and he had an amazing Easter, but certainly Easter Sunday, his first troll, he got that fish, a 123, landed that. Second troll, he got this fish, a 117, and half an hour later he got a 110. And I'd love that. In the newspaper column I loved the heading that the paper wrote up. It said, "Pope enjoys Easter miracle."